afternoon, everyone. My name is Cherie Thomas. My pronouns are she, her, and I serve as Deputy Director for the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. Today, we are going to have a discussion on Domestic Violence 101. And as Allison stated, please feel free to engage and interact in whichever way is most comfortable for you. I want you to get as much as you can out of this session because the issue of domestic violence is one that is near and dear to my heart, but it also impacts the entirety of our state. So who are the coalition? So for the coalition, we are a membership-based organization, and our goal is to really work on efforts to eliminate domestic and sexual violence throughout the state of Michigan. We really want to work to create a space where equality, equity, peace, social justice all exist and where domestic and sexual violence no longer exist. We also have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, free, anonymous, and confidential domestic violence and sexual assault hotline. We have nonprofit management services that we offer, technical assistance and trainings that we provide. We have a survivors law clinic that works specifically to support individuals who have experienced sexual violence and human trafficking with a few spaces specifically for domestic violence, but mostly it's sexual assault. We provide legislative policy advocacy and prevention efforts in our state. So we are going to jump right into defining domestic violence, going into our objectives. And again, any questions, please just ask. So today, I really want us to walk away being able to integrate the core principles of being survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and intersectional into our service provision. I want us to be able to identify barriers that are faced by survivors, to know the definition of domestic violence, and to readily recognize tactics that are used by perpetrators. Now, these objectives are large objectives that we're going to cover today, but they're really critical in helping us to understand the ways in which domestic violence impacts those that we're serving, and maybe even individuals that are in our personal lives. So to begin this discussion today, I want us to start with a grounding. The topic of domestic violence and interpersonal violence is a difficult one for many. For our particular time together today, I'm going to ask that we pause and recognize that domestic and sexual violence can and does impact all of us. The stats tell us that there is a high probability that as we are gathered here today, some of us are survivors, some of us are currently experiencing intimate partner violence or domestic violence. Some of us are serving people who are experiencing domestic and sexual violence and intimate partner violence. All of us who are serving individuals will or have come in contact with someone who is experiencing IPV. And there are going to be times in which that information is not disclosed to us. So therefore, as the space is open to questions today, I'm going to ask that we are thoughtful as we consider our questions, as we ask our questions, that we're actually going to take the time and we're going to consider, am I asking a question in which I would be comfortable with someone who has experienced domestic violence overhearing this today? One of the things I strive to do, and I ask others to do, is to govern ourselves as if we are always in the presence of someone who has experienced domestic violence. With that being said, if at any point you need to step away to take care of yourself, please do so. We will be engaged in discussions and view video and imagery that may cause discomfort. As service providers, we may be uncomfortable a lot as we hear from those who have been harmed. Today is an opportunity for us to learn, to grow, and fine-tune our skills to hold space. I know that's much easier said than done, but that's what we're going to practice today. We're going to practice being able to be in that space of discomfort as we're listening to the the lived experiences of those who have experienced intimate partner violence or domestic violence. So we're going to start now with a video.
You ready?
Yep.
And for the rest of my life, I don't want to be with anyone but you.
What are you doing?
Until death do you part.
I do. Well, maybe I wouldn't have to worry about other guys looking at you if you didn't dress like a whore.
I just don't know what I would do if you were with anyone but me.
Where you been? Look at me when I'm talking to you. You hear me? Look, I didn't want to do that. You just don't listen. Who's that?
Hey! You sure you're okay? I'm fine.
Who's gonna take you in but me? You will never see your son again. How about next time? I make sure you never leave the house again. Guess it's my lucky damn day. Look what I found under the bathroom sink.
Tony! Wait, just no, hold on!
YWCA hotline. How can I help you? Every day, 24,000 women are abused by someone they love. Just one phone call can help put a stop to it.
So I want us all to take a pause and take a deep breath and take in what we just saw. I know for right after lunch, early afternoon, that was a lot. And this is just a glimpse into what people who are experiencing domestic and sexual violence and intimate partner violence may experience. So I want us to just take a moment. And again, I recognize that this is a very difficult conversation and difficult topic. But let's have a conversation about what stood out to us in this video. So you can either raise your hand so you can unmute and speak, or you can utilize the Q&A to share your thoughts back.
Deborah, you can talk.
So what I see is what is brought to me every day being sheltering homeless with people who have been abused. It's the fear of not only of the person that is abusing them, the fear of the unknown, what's going to happen to them in the long run.
Thank you. Yes, that fear is very real. The fear of the unknown, the fear of the harm that the person who is causing harm is doing to them, and also the recognition that for many people who are fleeing domestic violence, options on where to go safely and in the time and place that you need to go are limited. And so there are a lot of unknowns that happen for survivors of domestic violence. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Lori, you're unmuted.
I was just going to say control. That is control.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for pointing out the control, because for any of you who may not have noticed the control, it started out very innocently. Like things that we consider just things that happen in the course of a relationship or getting to know someone turned into a pattern of control. Thank you.
Jacqueline, you're unmuted.
Like you said in the beginning, it looks really regular. But one thing that he did say that I feel like would keep their victim there, he mentioned the child is like a threat. You will never see your child again, and mothers probably willing to comply or stay for the sake of the child.
Thank you. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, there are many reasons in which people may decide, I need to stay in this longer. And one of them is the safety of the child. Or when he said you may not see the child again, recognize also he had access to weapons. So we don't know what that may have looked like. And we do know, even within our state of Michigan, domestic violence, homicide rates are high, and also the murder of children in relationships where people are fleeing domestic violence is high as well. And that is a lot for a person to take into consideration as they're trying to figure out, what does safety look like for me and my family? Thank you.
Scott, you are unmuted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to say, it seems like he's hear or see, experience these things common with this particular example from the male perspective. I mean, where's his confidence? Why is he so jealous?
Thank you for asking that question. So the question is, why is he so jealous?
Does he have
And
confidence or surety within himself and his own person, his own skin?
and we're going to get to this in just a moment, but I'm going to answer your question right now,
Sure.
which is, in the instance of domestic violence, there are a lot of people who have insecurities about themselves who choose not to perpetrate domestic violence. There are a lot of people that walk around with feelings of jealousy, of not knowing if they feel worthy, who choose not to harm other people. And one of the things that happens many times is these things that happen are also things that we utilize as a society as a whole as a way of saying, maybe this is why this person is doing those things. But in all actuality, it's choice making. He has chosen to be abusive, because you can be insecure and not be abusive. He chose to put her down. You can wonder about your place within a relationship without putting someone down, right? We learn how to communicate, we learn how to ask questions. We do these things in our workplace. We do these things in our friend relationships and in our family relationships. And one of the things that we do know about domestic violence, and I'm going to move us forward a little bit, is that it is a pattern of power and control that a person exerts over another, and it's carried out in strategic ways. And the strategies that are deployed in domestic violence vary from person to person and relationship to relationship, which is why when I'm working with advocates who are supporting individuals who have experienced domestic violence, we talk about staying present with that person, meaning all of the information that I'm going to share with all of you today is a generalized view of domestic violence. However, the person who is experiencing domestic violence is the person that can best tell you about what it looks like in the context of their relationship and with the person who has chosen harm. So we're going to talk about a lot of different tools and strategies that are used to carry out domestic violence, and also the fact that perpetrators of domestic violence utilize as much or as little physical and sexual violence as they feel is necessary to maintain control in the relationship. And they utilize other tactics as well, and we're going to go over those things. It's also important to note that some of these things may manifest themselves as jealousies, but when you talk to the people who are doing these things, perpetrators in particular, they will tell you, many have said, I'm not jealous. You're doing these things to cause me to behave this way. And what we do know is that we are in control of our own behaviors and our thoughts and our processes. and we get to decide how we're going to engage with one another. So when we think about why people are choosing to perpetrate domestic violence, they're choosing to because it's something that is working for them. It's something that they've decided is necessary. And in many cases, we don't see those same behaviors in work relationships, in friend relationships. We see those things in intimate partner relationships. And so for our time together, we're going to talk about it from that standpoint of being a pattern of power and control in an intimate partner relationship, because the tactics that are used for people who are choosing to batter to support and help them to not batter anymore are different from those who are dealing with a multitude of other issues as well. So I want to share with you the power and control wheel. So the power and control wheel is a tool that was created out of Duluth, Minnesota. And in the center, you see power and control. And then in the outside, the spokes, because it's a wheel, you see all of these different tactics that are utilized to exert power and control in the relationship. So we have using coercion and threats, using intimidation, using emotional abuse, using isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, using male privilege, and using economic abuse. So I'm going to take a moment and we're going to go through some of these, because some of these things that we saw, we could see very clearly in the video that we just watched. So let's start with the using children, making her feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass her, threatening to take the children away. That was one that we clearly saw and heard within the video. Then we have using economic abuse, preventing her from getting or keeping a job, making her ask for money, giving her an allowance, taking her money, not letting her know about or have access to family income. Now, in the video that we saw her trying to attempt to gain control of her finances by putting money away. She hid money up underneath the sink, and unfortunately, he found that money. So one of the things that we're going to talk about later on in our discussion today is when we're going over safety optioning with people, is talking about safety options in a way that also helps keep people safe. We often talk about putting away money, but where are we putting away money? And is putting away money really a safe and viable option for you? Then there's using emotional abuse, putting her down, making her feel bad about herself, calling her names, making her think she's crazy, playing mind games, humiliating her, making her feel guilty, using intimidation, making her afraid by using looks, actions, gestures, smashing things, destroying her property, abusing pets, displaying weapons. These are things that we saw clearly happening within that small video that we saw. Now, on the outside of the wheel, we see physical and sexual violence. And that outside wheel is to demonstrate for us the ever looming threat or presence of physical or sexual violence. So, as I stated before, not everyone experiences physical and sexual violence within the relationship, but the threat of physical and sexual violence are ever present. And those things hold that will together in conjunction with all of the different tactics that are utilized within this will. And further on in our presentation today, we're going to hear from Ellen Pence, who actually worked with survivors to create this will and also worked with batterers, to hear from them their perspective on why choosing to be abusive. So this video that we're going to see is another short video. It's called The Story of Rachel. And in this video, we're going to hear from a person, their experiences of dealing with a multitude of systems.
All right, your turn, Portia. Come on, guys.
Mom, can we play till I win?
Audrey, it's been so crazy around here.
Girl, what did he do now?
Girl, I did it. I called the police on his ass and they took him out of here.
Oh my goodness.
Mom, I got into the band. Miss Peters said I'm good enough to play the violin.
Mommy is so proud of you. I just want you to know that. I knew you could do it.
Hey, what do you think we should do for Mom's birthday? How about a surprise party? That'd be a great one.
Mom, when is Dad coming back? I hope he's here for Christmas.
Daryl, are you ready to go?
Baby, you know I didn't mean to do that. You know how much you and the kids mean to me. What can I do to make
No. Calvin, I've heard it too many times before.
Mom, those people are at the door again.
All right, just tell him I'll be down there. Just go downstairs and wait. I'm on my way.
What did you do? Why these people tell me I can't see my kids? Oh, you're gonna pay for this. Rachel, you listening to me?
Mom, can I have a friend over tomorrow?
Portia, I don't know, okay?
But Mom,
I'm very busy.
Dara got to have a friend over last week.
Ms. Williams, I'm calling to inform you that you're past due on your phone bill. Would you be able to make a payment by the 30th?
I don't know. I really don't know. Hey. Don't cry. Hush. Listen, those kids don't know anything about you. You are a wonderful child. You are a beautiful girl.
Hey Mom, Pastor Freud called. He wants to know if we can sing at church. I told him we will.
But Daryl, ugh.
Mom, don't forget I have basketball practice after school.
I won't forget, Portia. I would never forget. When is it?
Mom, I don't feel good.
You don't feel good like what?
Don't hang up. Just let me tell you. Hey, the last time I talked to you, I was just really upset. Just, let's just work this thing out.
Calvin, no. It doesn't work like that, okay? Audrey, I do not know what I'm going to do. Girl, they are evicting me. I won't have a place to live. Girl, what am I supposed to tell my kids?
I know y'all miss me, right? Is Mom taking good care of y'all? Now, you know I'm gonna be home as soon as I can, but it's up to your mom.
Mom, when is Dad coming home?
I don't think Dad will be coming back home, honey.
He wants to come home, but he says you won't let him.
Oh, baby.
Mom, I aced my spelling test. Can we go shopping? Mom, can you tell Dare to get out of my space? She started it. Did not. Did too.
Stop it!
All right. So we're going to open it up again to talk about the different systems in which she came in contact with as she was fleeing living with domestic violence. So we have Rachel, who has children, who has done what someone has suggested that she do, which is to seek to leave. Now, what all systems has she come in contact with, and how are those systems supporting her in her efforts to be free from violence?
We got a couple other, another question before that. Did you want me to hold it or?
Sure, let's do them.
Okay, so one person says I'm a domestic violence survivor and you are spot on.
Thank you.
And then someone else is asking if domestic violence can occur between non-intimate relationships. For example, a parent and an adult child. I see that power and control may occur in that relationship also. Do the laws or VAWA cover that relationship as well, or only in intimate partner relationships? I don't know the answer. I'm sure he probably does, but Denise, I will put the Coalition on Domestic and Sexual Violence did an Understanding the VAWA Act webinar for us, and I'll put that recording in the chat as well.
Thank you. And yes, in the state of Michigan, if you are being abused by a parent or a different family member, it does fall under domestic violence laws. But for the services that are provided through organizations that are meant to serve individuals who have experienced domestic and sexual violence, it's intimate partner violence only. And VOCA and VAWA are specifically designed for intimate partner violence.
Stay. Stop there.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
I think it was a mistake.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have some answers in the Q&A. So in my opinion, the groups she interacted with essentially made her transition harder. The situation shows how the stress accumulates and overwhelms the mother. She is being stressed to the max. And sometimes when people try to help and truly do not understand your circumstances, it may seem like she is unable to commit or is unresponsive. She truly is just overwhelmed. And then we have a question. So if you want to respond to those comments first, then I can ask you the question.
Yes, you're absolutely right. She truly is overwhelmed with all of the different systems that she has to come in contact with, and she's required to do so, right? I mean, she can't opt out. And as service providers, when we are unaware of the different systems in which a survivor has to interact with, in addition to ours, we can unintentionally add on to the stressors instead of supporting. So, one of the things that we should really work to do is to create a space where a survivor can share with us exactly who all they have to come in contact with, when they have to come in contact with, and ask how best we can be of support to them. You know, if there are things that are required for them to get to the next step, maybe we can assist in helping them to talk through what their priorities are. Oftentimes, our priorities are not a match exactly for the priorities of the person who is having the experience. And as long as we recognize that we're invited guests along the journey, then we know our roles. Someone has decided along the way that they needed assistance in dealing with intimate partner violence, domestic violence. They saw us as the experts, they invited us in to assist. And that's what we do. We meet them where they are and we prioritize based on their priorities while also giving them all of the information that they need to make an informed decision for themselves.
Okay, the question that we have is what is available for persons who have been abandoned by friends of opposite sex? It is not intimate relationship, but violence has abuse, I'm sorry. What is available for persons who have been abused by friends of the opposite sex? It's not an intimate relationship, but violence has occurred.
So, my expertise is in intimate partner and domestic violence. I do know that within the state of Michigan, you do have a legal remedy through contacting law enforcement. If that's an option that would like to be exercised, you can definitely contact them and they will do an investigation. There also an opportunity through the court to have a personal protection order that is not of an intimate partner nature. Those particular steps are not steps that I'm familiar with. I just know that those things exist because my focus for almost 25 years now has been domestic and sexual violence.
Okay, thank you. We have more comments to the story of Rachel. So we have CPS holds mothers responsible for violence that occurs in the home. The advocate assisting with the PPO is very helpful. That process can be frustrating and confusing. She's constantly giving of herself, being emptied out emotionally and physically. Seems no one was really coming alongside her to help. She's struggling, trying to raise her kids and flee domestic violence, which is creating so much stress for her as a single mother.
Thank you.
And
Absolutely.
And then the last one is image matters, and it can be embarrassing for the mom to talk about what she's going through. Like her church is asking her to organize a bake sale, not knowing what stresses she is under, but they are an organization that can provide support, but she might be embarrassed to talk about it.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, yeah, it's so complex. There are so many moving pieces. So, she has CPS where she's trying to comply with all of the orders, the visitation. She has her children who are needing her, who are pulling her in all of these different directions. She's trying to be present for them. And then she also has her church who's asking for her to be present as well. And it is hard to tell other people what's happening. There is a sense of shame and embarrassment that many people feel when they have experienced domestic and intimate partner violence. And it's not always the case in which they share it and people automatically understand or provide an ear of empathetic listening versus judgment. Many survivors share that people are often judgmental when they're sharing that they've experienced domestic or intimate partner violence. And that is very much the last thing that you need when you've decided, I'm going to reach out to someone. I'm going to, in my vulnerability, share with you what has happened to me. And as we're going through this conversation today, one of the things that we're going to talk about is how do we hold a space that is empathetic, that is survivor centered, and also trauma informed as well. As we were listening to Rachel's story, I want us to recognize that she was experiencing a multitude of traumatic events at one time. And oftentimes, because some of those things are just stressors for some people, they're traumas for others, we can't readily recognize them as traumas for someone else. So, for example, she was experiencing an eviction, being unhoused, and the potentiality of being unhoused is a traumatic event. She had already fled her home due to domestic violence and she's working with these systems, right? And we already talked about CPS being one of those systems and the child visitation. She had her former partner who was utilizing the children to send messages back and forth to her. We heard that very clearly. She also was dealing with a loss of income, right? You need to be able to pay your bills. Like all of these things are compounding. And on a regular day, when you have and feel like you have other options, they could be just stress. But when you're talking about adding them on top of domestic violence and figuring it out for yourself in the midst of engaging with all of these systems, it becomes much more than just stress. As advocates, we have to hold space for the fact that it is much more than just stress. So that way we can be present for the survivor. Survivor centered just literally means being present and allowing the survivor to lead. Like we don't narrate and create the direction for them. We provide information and resources so they have choice, so they can choose, and they can do so with the necessary information to have an informed choice.
We have a couple more comments.
Yes,
One
please.
is, as a survivor of DV and a woman of color, the system didn't protect me. Also, the PPO was dismissed and I was found to be uncooperative and my ex-husband was found to be the victim. I was broken down to next to nothing and lost my family in the process because they sided with my ex. So if you want to respond to that one first.
Yes. So first of all, thank you so much for sharing that with us today. And I am hopeful that as people are listening, we can take a moment and recognize that our systems are flawed. And this is why we take into consideration as advocates what the person is sharing with us and what their experience is versus our experience with those systems. Our experience with those systems is a system to system experience, which means that at the end of the day, what happens between the systems, we still get to go home with our lives intact. When we're providing services to a survivor, every engagement with a system has some sort of consequence to it, be it a positive or negative or indifferent, there is one. And when a person is sharing with us that they have a fear of losing their children, they share with us that they are concerned about what it would mean for them to engage with the courts or engage with law enforcement, we have to listen to those things and we have to honor them. So before we just say to someone, go get a PPO, go get go talk to law enforcement, we have to fully understand what all of that means. So for example, when I'm working with a survivor, I always share with them, because this information is really important, that if your children are present in the home when domestic violence is occurring and you call the police, police will have to call Child Protective Services. That is not up for debate. You can't ask them not to. They most definitely will, and they have to. That's important because as I'm working through safety optioning with a survivor, we can talk about what are your options in the event that domestic violence is happening in your home. Are there neighbors that your children can go to? Is there a safe space that they can go to? Is there someone that you can call that can be there in a minute or so who lives around the corner or whatnot to get your children? What are your options before you make that phone call so they can make an informed choice and decision for themselves? Because the only option sometimes may be there isn't an option and I will call because that's what's going to be the best for me. And I recognize that it introduces this other system into my life. However, that's a decision I get to make. It's very important that we don't take away decision making from survivors. We also talk about the fact that personal protection orders can be revoked, and also the information that you write within those documents is not a secret. So that means that the person who is causing the harm will be able to see what is written. So that way a person can make a decision about what information they would like to disclose and how it's disclosed if they so choose to. So we're very clear and honest about those things. We also talk about the fact that the personal protection order is only as strong as the person who's causing harm chooses to allow it to be, which means that there are times in which a personal protection order is enough to deter further harm, and there are other times in which it is not. So we walk through all of these things. We cannot promise to anyone that any particular option that we utilize is going to absolutely work because we don't know, which is why we talk about them in the form of options. We also talk about and practice how are we engaging and how can I support you in engaging with these systems so that way your voice can be heard. It is very hard to communicate when you're experiencing trauma lifetime. It's very hard to communicate clearly what's happening to you when you're upset and rightfully so upset, when you're afraid and rightfully so afraid. It's very hard to communicate clearly because our brains don't operate that way when we're experiencing trauma. However, for the person who is not experiencing that trauma, but who's causing that harm, oftentimes they're communicating very clearly. And in their clear communication, oftentimes they're able to be heard. And so, one of the things that we have to do is be able to decipher and recognize who actually is the person who needs our services and who actually is causing the harm, and not get sucked into it's automatically the calmest person, because that does not give us a clear picture of what has actually taking place. And if we go back and we look at that power and control wheel, we talk about the isolation, the fear, the using of resources and taking away of resources. All of those things impact a person's ability to actually feel safe enough to get the help that they need and to utilize interventions that may be present in the way in which they were designed to do so. So as advocates, we have our work cut out because being survivor-centered means believing survivors. It's somebody else's job to investigate, and regardless of how that comes out, we believe survivors.
Okay, we have a couple more. So we have, it was also very important to recognize that he was telling the kids that it was her fault he was gone.
Mhm.
And she felt she couldn't tell the kids the full story. And then we have another comment: as a DV survivor, I felt victimized again by the system. I felt like they blamed me for what was happening, as if because I couldn't get away from him that I somehow deserved it.
Thank you for sharing. And unfortunately, that is a reality that many survivors have shared with me over the years, is that systems oftentimes make the survivor feel as if it was their fault. And so our goal as service providers is to constantly reassert that it is not your fault ever what has happened to you, that someone else has chosen these behaviors. And so we have to really work hard to debunk myths. So oftentimes we hear all of these myths, right? Like if the person wasn't on alcohol or drugs, it wouldn't happen. They're only doing this because they're stressed or they're angry or because they've witnessed abuse in their lifetime. This is why they're doing this. And what we know is that alcohol, lots of people drink, but it does not cause them to harm another person. There are people who utilize drugs who never harmed anyone. We experience stress on a regular basis. Some people experience stress just trying to figure out how to get into the webinar today. And witnessing abuse is a risk factor. It does not necessarily mean that you will in turn become an abuser. And there are many of us on this webinar today that have witnessed abuse who have not gone on to harm others. So it's really important for those of us who are supporters and advocates of people who have experienced domestic violence that we really debunk these myths and share that it's choice making and the person can choose not to cause harm. They're choosing to cause harm, and it is no way the person who's being harmed fault at all.
And I just want to say someone in the chat was agreeing with our last survivor who spoke up, and they said, yes, I agree, and I can relate to that personally.
Yep. Thank you. Thank you. And that goes back to our grounding that we did when we first opened up, which is recognizing that we're always in the midst of someone who has experienced intimate partner violence, domestic violence. And as we are more aware of that, and we really understand the dynamics of domestic violence, we can better create a space in which domestic violence no longer exists. But we have to first be able to recognize it so we can create interventions and prevention efforts that are actually effective. So we're going to listen to a 911 call, and you're going to have to listen really carefully because it's a recording and it's a 911 call, and there is yelling and swearing. So I'm letting you know that now, but you're going to have to listen really carefully.
Before we start, there's a comment that I wanted to read.
Yes, please.
It says, these videos are acting like a trigger for me. Being able to control my reaction is only through counseling and being able to open up about my past experience to help the clients I encounter. I truly believe your efforts are effective. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I do know that regardless of where you are in your healing, healing is not linear like we would like it to be. And so there are times in which we're like, I'm okay, I'm good, I've passed it. And then something happens to let us know that what happened to us can still come up and impact us. And I want us all to know that it's okay when those things happen. It doesn't mean that you're defective in any kind of way. It just means that trauma is doing what it does, which is it rears its head when we don't want it to. It never comes at the perfect time. And so, again, I encourage all of you, if you need to step away, please step away because this is hard. It is difficult. And being able to hold this space for someone who is standing or sitting right in front of us or on the phone with us, and they're sharing this information with us, it's even harder for them. We get an opportunity to step away and come back as service providers. So, as we're doing that, we can also think of how we can support someone who is experiencing it in their own self-care and being able to manage when they aren't in our presence.
Oh, look at my face, bitch. Look at my head, bitch. Oh, whatever. You started this shit.
911, what's your emergency? 911.
Call him, motherfucker. Don't call him.
Hello?
Put your hands on me.
What's going on there?
Put your hands on me. Billy. I'm tired of you hitting on me, bitch. Ain't nobody hit you, hello.
What's going on there, sir?
The police over here at 1281 Medford Drive. This woman hit me in my head. Beat me up.
Okay.
Yeah, I hit him in his head because he hit me in my goddamn face. So it's not...
All right, what's your name?
Please, no, my face. Call that motherfucker.
What's your name, sir?
I hit you, motherfucker. Hello.
What's your name, sir?
Yeah. I'm tired of you hitting on me, bitch. Yeah, right. You've been beating on me for the past 2 months.
What's your name?
I ain't
Billy
Williams. No goddamn
Mr. Williams?
Billy Williams.
Billy Williams? What's going on there, Billy?
I'm calling on you. Get away from me. I'm calling on you, bitch. 1281 Medford. 1281 Medford Drive for Tracy Davis. And while you're at it, pull up the other shit where this bitch been doing.
Okay, who is that screaming, sir?
That's her.
What's her name?
She's trying to make it seem like I don't know.
Okay, what's her name?
Pull the file and see what my face been like.
Billy, what's her name?
I hit that motherfucker, and I'm bleeding too. I can't hear you. If I can bleed, you can bleed, bitch. What'd you say? You don't make me bleed.
Are there any weapons in the house, Billy?
She hit me now.
Billy, talk to me, not to her. Are there any weapons in the house?
You ain't hitting on me no more, Billy. She gone crazy. You ain't hitting on me no more. Go on, Pat. You ain't hitting me.
Billy.
Go ahead on.
Okay. So we're going to stop that there because it's a very long call, but I just wanted you to be able to hear some of what we've been talking about thus far. So I'm going to ask if you want to unmute or put in the chat what it is that you believe you heard. And then I will share with you what was occurring if we don't get it. This is team effort.
Can we just talk or do I need to raise my hand first? I'm sorry, I didn't want to speak out of a turn.
Oh, go ahead, please. I can hear you.
I believe he had called on her and he was going to make allegation with her, but it sounds like she was the one that was abused and she retaliated against him and fought him back.
Yes, you are 100% correct. Thank you. So this was an instance in which the person who was causing harm actually called 911 first. And the point of him calling 911 was for her to not be able to have access to help. And so when we talk more a little later about perpetrator dynamics and what they do, this is one of the things that they do is eliminate your access to help, eliminate your access to resources. I've worked with a number of survivors who can't even get legal help because the perpetrator has conflicted them out, meaning he's contacted all of the legal aid services and all of the attorneys within an area, and now she's not able to get help because he's contacted them all, and now they're not able to provide assistance. And that is just one of the tactics that is utilized when we're talking about maintaining power and control within a relationship that prohibits a person from being able to leave a relationship, because then where do they go? What are their options? And when you don't understand that those tactics are very real and being used, it actually sounds implausible when you're hearing it. Many times, without an understanding of domestic violence, when someone is telling you what has happened to them and all of the ways in which they've been harmed, it does sound like a TLC movie, like something that somebody just made up. And our brains are having a really hard time of wrapping around the fact that this is someone's reality because it's so far from our own lived experiences, which is why we have to work really hard to recognize it's not my experience. This is someone else's experience. And they're sharing with me. They've chosen to, in their vulnerability, share with me this very intimate fact about themselves, in which many people don't believe them. And then we hold that space and we do believe them. And so, we do know that in some cases, children are present in the homes when domestic violence is happening. And someone mentioned earlier in their comments that sometimes CPS can and does hold the person who is the parent, the mother, responsible for the harm that the perpetrator is causing, which also makes it hard, right? If you are doing everything that you can to be safe and create safety for you and your children, and you reach out for help, but you're then told that because you reached out for help, you're failing to protect your child, options again are limited. People are making these really tough decisions. And we, as service providers, have to consider what are we doing to support them in making those tough decisions. And one of those things that we can do is be in a place of empathy and not in judgment, to actually hold space for someone, listen. And empathy is a really hard skill that has to be practiced because as a society, we're really practiced in sympathy. I mean, I love greeting cards and I buy them frequently. And there's a huge section of greeting cards called sympathy cards. But there isn't one called empathy, right? Because when you're truly in a space of empathy, that means you're feeling with. So we're going to watch this short little clip on empathy so we can just have a grounding in what it means to be empathetic.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
And this is one of those places that we really have to practice our empathetic listening skills. Many times when someone's sharing something hard with us, we want to move on past it really quickly. We want to move to problem solving. We want to move to solutions really quickly because it moves us out of that pain space. However, if you move too fast out of that pain space, none of the options that you're going to offer, none of the suggestions, n- even though they can be the greatest thing and actually be the tool that is needed, they aren't going to be helpful if that person hasn't fully processed what they've experienced. So take the time and allow somebody to fully process what they're experiencing. Just hear them, hold that space. Having all the answers is not a requirement. We rarely have all the answers, but being able to tell someone, I believe you, it's not your fault, I'm here for you, I'll work through this with you, some of the greatest gifts that you can offer someone who has experienced domestic violence. And so, one of the other things too is recognizing that everybody's lived experiences are different. So when we talk about the impact of intersectionality. We're talking very broadly about the interconnectedness and the way that systems impact us based on our identities. And the majority of us walk around in a multitude of different spaces and a multitude of different identities. When Kimberly Crenshaw coined the term intersectionality, she talked specifically about the intersection of being Black and being a woman, and how systems impacted women's abilities, Black women's abilities to gain movement and employment. But then over time, she also talked about other identities as well. And so as we are moving forward, it's going to be really important for us as service providers to, one, understand who we are as service providers, understanding the areas in which we experience privilege, also understand the areas in which we experience harm or marginalization because of our identities, and really consider how those things are impacting our ability to be present for the people that we're serving. So we're going to watch another video. And again, this is another video that has violence in it. And I say that because, again, these videos are tough, but it gives us a good view, a good introduction into what people are experiencing.
You're doing a real good job on your picture.
Coffee.
Please.
I'd like some more too, please, sir.
She spilled my coffee.
I'm sorry, sir.
You fucking bitch. I'll bring a little coffee. How do you like this?
You wouldn't get away with it here. You shouldn't get away with it at home.
All right, so let's pause for a moment and take some deep breaths. Take a deep breath in and then out through your mouth. Another deep breath in and then another breath out. Okay, so let's talk about what we just witnessed here. What did we just witness? And you can unmute and speak out, or you can place it in the Q&A.
We had someone right away wrote, woo! And then someone else wrote, no one help.
Yeah, it definitely was a woo moment, seriously. And yes, no one helped. Now, let's also talk about this too, because this was an illustration of what happens in private, but they gave it to us in a public space. And what we do know is that the majority of acts of domestic violence happen in private. Why is that? Why do we believe that is?
Because no one will call them out. Nobody would speak up against that person. It's like power and control. They know they have control over that person. So they don't have another person coming in and pointing out that they did something wrong.
Yeah, yeah. Oftentimes it's because they aren't held accountable. Absolutely. They've created a dynamic of fear within the household. They've created a space in which they have and hold the power in the home, and they know that they can get away with it. And it's a choice. Did you notice the reactions of the children in the video?
There are
Like, here
lots
we
of
go again.
comments. We have the code of conduct is probably not about the children, but the code of conduct is different in public, control, poor temperament, impulsive, no witnesses and comfort, quick escalation with little provocation, no witnesses, no witnesses. So no one can see, no one can help. So they get away with it and their image is intact. They don't want to ruin their reputation with others. Choice. Perpetrators make choices about their abusive behaviors. They know their behavior is bad and do not want someone to know that they are almost never held accountable. I experienced almost the same scenario. Fortunately, the owner of the restaurant, a man, stepped to my abuser to bring him back to reality. He just held his anger until he got to the car because they don't want any witnesses.
Mm-hmm.
To maintain a public persona in a public place is why they wouldn't behave abusively in public. The children have learned not to do or say anything and they have become numb to it. And that's it. That's all the comments.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing. Thank you all for your comments. And again, for all of you who are survivors on this call who are bravely sharing out with us your experiences, thank you for that. And thank you for lifting up your voices and allowing it to be heard. And you're absolutely right. There is a public self and a private self that exists in many instances where domestic violence and intimate partner violence is present. And it is one of the reasons why people have a hard time finding help because of those two different personas that exist. I have served lots of survivors over the years, and I've heard from many people who know both the survivor and the perpetrator that no, that person would never do that because they're so kind, they're so gentle, they're giving, blah, blah, blah. And it completely discounts and dismiss the lived experience of the person who's experienced the harm. And many of us know if we even think about our own selves, we have a work self and a home self. When we come to work, we put on our professional hat, we use our professional words. You know, I like to say when I'm at work, I utilize $1,000,000 words because I'm still paying for my student loans. But at home, they're a nickel because that's all that's required to communicate, right? And so if we can recognize that we can change who we are from place to place, it should not be that much of a stretch for us to hear someone share their lived experience of being harmed by someone who we've never experienced harm from. It doesn't mean it didn't happen or that it couldn't happen. And so it's incumbent upon us to recognize that perpetration is a choice, and where a person chooses to perpetrate is also a choice.
We had someone say that the perpetrator knew their actions were not appropriate. Someone is posting a video. If we want to spend 33 minutes watching them tell about their experience at the Charles Wright Museum in 2018. So if you want me to put that in the chat for everyone to see, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm not going to do that. I believe most abusers learn their behavior from their own family. Learned behavior is extremely hard to change. And I spoke openly with my children whenever they saw the behavior. My own children now as adults are able to speak openly about their own experiences, and my children broke the cycle of abuse. I had an abuser that would do and say things in front of others, and others would not do anything, so he continued to do and say things in front of them. I worked in military intelligence on the war on terror from 2002 to 2007. These techniques are exactly how terrorists function in small villages and tribes, controlled by domination and fear, and the lack of people to protect themselves or even try and band together. So they all default to keeping their heads down and just survive and be hopeful nothing happens to them. I think children in these situations end up doing this. And then, so those are the comments right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And we do know that witnessing domestic violence is a risk factor for being victimized and also becoming a perpetrator. But I want us to be clear that it is a risk factor. It is not a predictor. So, as someone just pointed out, you can learn other behaviors and choose to do differently, to choose other options. And, what's on the slide right now, battering happens in the context of a culture that promotes, tolerates, endorses, condones, and celebrates and encourages violence against women. We do know that if we didn't live in a society that actually condoned it, that didn't allow it or encourage it, it would stop. It wouldn't happen. And so we're really working to change the way in which our culture operates. We're really trying to change this cultural dynamic so that it doesn't happen. Because there are, and someone just said, instances in which people witness violence and they do nothing, or they hear someone being put down and they do nothing, or they feel like it's not their place to say something. And I want us all to know that to truly end intimate partner violence, to truly end domestic violence, it is our place to say something. It is our place to do something. And that doesn't necessarily mean put yourself in the middle of a physical altercation, but it could be calling for help. It could be saying, stop, that's not okay. It could be saying to someone else, get help. It can look a lot of different ways. It can be saying to someone, I believe you, and here's where you can get help. There are so many options besides just silence when we know that these things are happening. And so, when we talk about perpetration, what we do know is that terminology has changed over time. And so back in the day, we used to have battered women's shelters. And we know that, the names of these different organizations have changed over time to reflect the fact that we know that domestic violence is more than just physical. And back in time, like in the 80s and early 90s, we refer to perpetration as battering and the perpetrator as batterer because there was a lack of understanding of the nuance of it all. And we know better now. We know that it's much more than just the physical assault. We understand that it is a systemic control, a systemic abuse, and that for the person who's being harmed, their ability to make decisions for themselves have been taken away from them. So we are going to hear quickly from Ellen Pence, who's going to share with us just how the will came to be and what she heard from survivors and from perpetrators.
When we decided what are we going to teach, we went to the women's groups and said, okay, if we can get these guys for 8 weeks or 10 weeks or 15 or however long we get them, what do you want us to teach them? And out of that eventually came the power and control wheel, those sessions with the women. This was the one that I remember that really got to me. This woman said, if you live with a batterer, it is not cyclical. It isn't something that comes and goes. You live with a batterer every day. Even when he's being nice to you, it's a part of the violence. Because if he's raping you and telling you you're no good and you're ugly here, and then 3 days later he's telling you you're beautiful and I need you and I want you, it's all part of the same thing. And don't think it's cyclical. And I went, well, yeah, I never thought that. And, I think I must have said it was cyclical, right? So then I kept saying, well, okay, what else is it like to live with a batterer? And then I remember coming back from that meeting and saying to Cora and Michael, we just got to go to these women's groups and ask these questions. And so we started going, what's it like to live with them? Describe it, and people starting to tell stories. And then we got into the word tactics. Somehow in the process, the word tactics came out. And we started asking him, what other tactics does he use against you besides violence? And he never lets us have any friends. So then we'd get all the women to tell a story about that. Who doesn't he let you see when? And then the word isolation started coming up. We lumped all that under isolation. and he's always putting you down and calling you names, and what are all the things he's doing that when they talk about that, and then emotional abuse became that category. And so it came from these stories. We actually had more tactics than what are on that power and control wheel, but they didn't display well graphically. You know, you just had to, all right, let's get down to the big 9 or whatever, because you could do a lot more tactics. There's some I wish now we had done from the beginning because they're so fundamental, but the ones that are on there I think are core tactics that almost all abusers use, you know. So anyways, these stories then, if every woman in the room had a story that fit this thing, then we knew it was a core tactic. And we went to about 3, we always had our groups in neighborhoods. So in central Duluth, we had a group going in west and east side. So we went to all 3 of those groups over several months and kept developing this thing over and over. And we'd bring our little designs in. We had a lot of different designs to it. And finally, we came up with the one where we put the violence around the outside and all the other tactics on the inside. We were trying to make it like a wheel where the violence held everything together, and these tactics were all part of a system. And we didn't say that the reason for the women weren't telling us men did it in order to get power and control. What they said was they ended up with all the power and all the control when they did this. And I always interpreted it as that women were saying men desired power and control. When I did my men's groups, I'd always say that. I'd always think that you were desiring, but I never heard the men say that. And that's when I started to understand the difference between feeling entitled to it, entitled to that control, and desiring it. Like as a white person, me feeling entitled to certain space wasn't a desire to dominate people of color. It's 2 different things, to want to dominate someone and to feel entitled to be in control. So I ended up not thinking that men wanted power and control. I ended up thinking and realizing, I think, that they felt entitled to it.
So here are some common characteristics of domestic violence and intimate partner perpetrators. So we talked about that discrepancy between the public and the private behavior, the blaming others to justify their actions, a strong sense of ownership, which gets to that entitlement that Ellen Pence just talked to us about. And the using controlling behaviors to get their partner to do or to stop doing something, and they're doing it because it gets them what they want. I mean, we want to make sure that we're clear that it's the domestic violence itself and us and our understanding as a society and the untangling it is complex, but the reasons why perpetration exists is not. you know um, when a person is choosing to dominate someone to get what they want, that's a choice that they've made that they don't have to choose to make, that they aren't exercising in other areas of their lives. And I want us to be clear about that. That's why there's such a disconnect between a person's ability to get help and understanding and empathy from other people, because the perpetrator is showing something different in the public life to other people. So, one of the things that we want to talk about is recognizing the risk for lethality. And I want us to um, know that sometimes when you're working with a survivor, they may not say strangulation. That's a term that we use because we know what strangulation is, but oftentimes it's framed as choking. So I'll hear, and people have said to me, I was choked out, I've been choked. And actually what they're talking about is strangulation, having the oxygen cut off, right? When choking, you're talking about having something actually in the inside blocking your windpipe. And they're talking about actually, hands around their neck or throat, or something being used externally to block their ability to bleed, to breathe. Violent jealousy, unwanted sexual intercourse or contact. This is another one that, again, people may not readily share these things with you because of what happens to a person when these things are happening. So, for example, if a person has experienced strangulation, they may also experience incontinence at that time too. And so they may not want to share that information with you. So it's important for us to note that these things do happen. And if you've experienced these things, it's nothing to be ashamed about. It is something that happens with the body when you have experienced strangulation. And, when you've also, when we go back over talking about intersectionality and being trauma informed, there are still people who are being taught that their body is not their body once they're married, that it belongs to their partner. And so we have an uphill battle in sharing with them that a person is not entitled to your body, that consent is still required in a relationship. That if you don't want to have sexual contact with someone, you have the right to say you don't want it or to show it. It doesn't have to always be verbal, but nonverbals speak very loud and clear as well. And oftentimes, harm to pets occur as a way to demonstrate a person's ability to carry out harm. So these are some things that we just want to be aware of. Again, these are some risk factors for lethality. And some additional ones are threats of suicide. So when the abuser is threatening to take their own life by suicide, threats and harms to others, being unemployed and having access to firearms, stalking and monitoring a person's ability to go to and fro. Again, all of these things are risk factors. They are not causalities. So none of these things actually cause domestic violence, or none of these things cause a person to do the things that they're doing. These are risk factors that we want to be aware of. And when we see more than one of these things, we really want to have a conversation with the survivor about their experience and how they feel about their safety. Again, we always want to take the lead from the person. So when we take into consideration all of the things that we've talked about thus far, what are some additional reasons a survivor might not disclose experiencing domestic violence or intimate partner violence? And I want you to think about it from what we've talked about, being survivor-centered, trauma-informed, and an intersectional lens. Why might a person say, you know what? Nope, I'm not going to tell anybody what's happening to me. And you can
So-
unmute or put it in the Q&A. Yes,
So I'll start reading the stuff we already have in, and we have 10 minutes left.
perfect. Thank you.
Women are too objectified and violence is glorified in our society. Some of these are from like 10 minutes ago. Someone's asking, and how many of these perpetrators have been diagnosed for mental illness of some sort? What percent of them are requiring mental health treatment? Which is, not sure if you'll get to that. Another question I'm not sure if you'll get to is, I am not sure if you will know the answer to this question. Why is it a domestic violence shelter, the stay is around 30 days, but a regular shelter is 90 days? I mean, I'm sure it's funding, but I'm not sure how that decision was made. My ex did this and showed one personality to the public and his family. Then in our home, the monster came out. Shame. So these are responses to your current question. Shame, still love the perpetrator, failure, shame about being a failure or religious beliefs, afraid to lose their job and that independence, want to protect their children, shameful. One reason is because it is what they grew up with and think is a way of life. Fear of consequences, increased risks of violence, homelessness, single parenting. Embarrassed, and some have also been taught to just sweep it under the rug. Shame. And then someone is asking if you can elaborate on the difference between entitlement and desiring something. So that is a lot.
That is a lot, but I love it.
Feels it is somehow their fault. So I'm going to stop
Yes.
reading now and let you respond. And I just want to let folks know that everything else we might not be able to get to by 2:30.
Thank you. Okay, so when you feel entitled to something, you feel as if it is something that you can have and there's not a reason not to. When you desire something, you know that it's something that you may have to work for, do something to get. It's not necessarily something that you're going to get. It's just something like, yeah, I desire to have a new car, but if I don't have the finances to get a new car, I might not get a new car, right? But if I feel entitled to it, I'm going to do and take liberties that I may not need to take because I feel entitled to. And also with entitlement, there's also a lack of an acknowledgement or awareness of the impact on others. It's a disregarding of that impact on others that is huge, which is why, when we talk about being in an empathetic spot, when you're in an empathetic spot, you do take into consideration what others are feeling and how they're feeling and how what you're saying and what you're doing is going to impact someone else. And that's huge. As far as the shelters with the 30-day and the 90-day stays between DV and regular homeless shelters, there are different funding streams. And so different ones have different stays. So there are some domestic violence shelters that do have 90 days. Um, and so it varies from space to space what those different stays are. Some of them have transitional housing, transitional supportive housing, permanent supportive housing, and a variety of different options. So it just varies. So this is our last video, and this one is on violence and homelessness.
Homelessness is an issue that far too many people face. People of color, specifically Black people, other persons of color, and Indigenous people, experience homelessness in a dramatically different way than their white counterparts. People who hold multiple identities, such as those who live at the intersections of disability, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender identity, and more, experience compounded barriers that further homelessness and housing instability. A recent study found that 66% of people experiencing homelessness were Black, while 28% were white. Black individuals are only 13% of the U.S. general population, compared to 74% of those who are white. Rates of homelessness within Native communities are 3 to 8 times higher than that of the general population. In total, 78% of people experiencing homelessness identified as people of color. This overrepresentation of Indigenous, Black, and other people of color experiencing homelessness cannot be explained by poverty or identity alone. Structural racism, historical policies, institutional practices, and cultural narratives that perpetuate racial inequity put people of color at a disadvantage in obtaining safe and affordable housing. Statistically, women of color are much more likely to experience domestic and sexual violence, and survivors often face network impoverishment. Network impoverishment occurs when the addition of a financially distressed household member places an extra strain on family resources. Oftentimes, we tell a survivor experiencing homelessness to go to a relative or friend's house. However, network impoverishment can cause immense burdens on the existing limited finances and available support from that network. Racial disparities arise at every juncture, from the legal system, to housing, to healthcare, to child welfare, to public benefits. Understanding the intersections between domestic and sexual violence, racism, and homelessness, and applying an equity, survivor-centered lens in our work is the only pathway to stability, safe housing, and healing for all survivors.
Now, when we talk about how we're going to provide safety to people, being able to see the whole person and recognize that they had experiences prior to coming to us is really important. And so, one of the things a lot of service providers find hard is dealing with someone whose reaction to a system may seem as if it is not actually related. Like, why are you being mean to me when I'm being nice? I'm only asking you these questions. Well, they've had experiences with other systems that weren't so supportive. And so I encourage all of you to not take it personal ever. Just recognize that we have a job to do to show that we are different and that we are going to be intersectional trauma informed and survivor centered. So that way we can offer safety options that actually support a person in the way that makes sense to them. And also work on harm reduction with them. And, I would encourage all of you to look at your organization's policies and procedures around what harm reduction may look like for all of you. But really honing in on those safety options that are attainable for someone. So when we talk about safety options and safety planning, we're talking about making sure the space is confidential and the person knows that they have the option to choose to participate or not participate and that their consent is informed, meaning that no other services are bearing on their ability to access them if they choose not to work on safety options. And then also start with the present. Are they safe right now? You know, what are they thinking? Where are they at? Figure out that first. Hold that space. You know, are they still living with the person who's causing harm? Because that's going to be a different set of options than someone who's already left. And so we want to take all of those things into consideration, including their emotional safety, the safety for their children, and what they believe it may look like if they do decide to separate from the person who's causing harm. We want to know and make sure that we know that this is completely personal. We know that it's not our life, it's their life, and they get to make the decision, and it is completely voluntary. That we keep the dialogue open. We listen, we hold that empathetic listening space, keep them our ears open, and make sure that they know that we aren't in a place of judgment and that, you know, their experience is their experience. And be aware of resources. So these are some resources that we offer at the coalition. We have the 24-hour Voices for Sexual Assault hotline, the 24-hour Voice DV domestic violence hotline, and we also have our human trafficking toolkit available. And with that being said, I believe I have a minute and a half for questions.
You do. I will read what's in the chat. Could be from who knows what you said. They've been collecting, but people look at them in a disempowering way, i.e., looked at as wants attention, looked at as her doing something wrong. Many women believe they deserve this treatment when they do not. For me personally, I was told that it didn't happen. Also, when my ex-husband strangled me, then called the police to arrest me, was taken to jail, etc., he phoned my stepfather and his sister. His sister told me to turn the other cheek because I am a Christian. My stepfather, sister, and mother told me to ignore it because men behave that way, so I grew numb to the abuse. Fear of backlash from his family. Many women don't want the relationship to end, they want the abuse to end. And then could you please give more information on what the Micah Law DV Law Clinic, what assistance does that offer, who is eligible to seek assistance, and how do people contact the clinic? Thank you. So it is not a Micah Law Clinic, so that is confusing because we're the Michigan Coalition Against Homelessness. Cherie works for the Michigan Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. So just clarifying that. And anything you want to respond to before I close out?
I just want to say thank you to everyone who shared and every survivor on here who bravely shared their story and their experiences. And I hope that those of us who are supporters and advocates of survivors, that we are able to take away what they've shared and incorporate that information to helping us be better advocates and service providers to those who have experienced domestic and intimate partner violence.